Why the secrecy? Like, why are there the secrecy provisions provided in this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Maybe I would.
Many people online have accused the Conservatives of staying silent on Bill C-8, claiming they haven't pushed back on the government's sweeping cybersecurity powers. But the reality is the complete opposite. Yesterday, Conservative MPs pressed officials hard on C-8's potential charter violations, warning that the bill could give the government unrestrained authority to target individual Canadians without a warrant and in secret. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. And this brings us to MP Lloyd for 6 minutes.
We had you for an hour just before this. It was in camera. We asked some good questions and we got some answers. And so for the interest of transparency, I'm going to kind of re-ask similar questions and hope that we can get the same answers. Now, I noted that under the CSIS Act for their threat reduction measures, that you have to get a warrant in order to move forward from the federal court. It's not clear under this legislation whether the government would need a warrant to move forward with the actions that they're giving themselves the power to do. Why is that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The powers under C-8 concern the ongoing regulation in terms of the security of underlying infrastructure. So in the instance of telecommunications, it's Bell's network infrastructure. They do not engage with certain charter rights or privacy considerations in that context. That's similarly how telecommunications operators are currently regulated. So, for instance, in the allocation of spectrum licenses that are necessary to run their wireless networks, that's currently an authority under the Minister of Industry. And there's no need for judicial oversight.
So we talked about a specified person in the previous hour, and you told me that they're a legal entity, not necessarily a natural person. There's a concern that when you have legislation that's written to say that the minister has the authority to order the telecoms to cease providing services to a specified person, there's a fear that we're talking about individual Canadians. Can you provide us with, if you believe an individual Canadian is a threat to the telecommunications system, there was degrading the system, disrupting the system, manipulating the system, why is there no requirement for a warrant in that case?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. In the context, if I understand the question correctly, for instance, in the regarding the authority to withdraw services from an entity. In that context, so first of all, the authorities are scoped in terms of needing to protect the Canadian telecommunications system. So that means that the individual commentary of Canadians or their ongoing traffic online is not germane to that, just in practical terms. So that would be in the context, for instance, of a distributed denial of service attack, which is flooding a network and preventing essentially the operation of it for other Canadians. The use of that authority needs to be reasonably necessary to advance the stated goal. So it can't just be on a whim. It needs to actually be tied to the gravity of the threat that's in question. And we are dealing with circumstances that where time is of the essence, where these are services that Canadians rely on for life and death, to be able to call 911 or to do things of that nature. And so there are considerations about being able to move quickly.
Okay, so being an IT guy, this is all in my wheelhouse, as well as the wheelhouse of many, many of our viewers. So if you don't mean I'm speaking to the Liberals now, if you don't mean that this legislation is meant to target an individual Canadian, then maybe write it that way in the Act. Because they're saying, well, it's not an individual person, it's an individual entity. Well, it says individual person in the Act. So maybe that should be amended before it's voted on. Just a suggestion. And the other thing is that they say, well, what we mean is that if there's a situation where there's an entity that's causing a deliberate denial of service attack, that's a DDoS attack. You've probably heard that acronym out there. And what a DDoS attack is essentially you flood a system or a website in order to crash it, right? So it makes a website completely inaccessible. And they say, well, time may be of the essence, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so time may be of the essence, but at the same time, you need to structure this properly. You have to actually put in to the law the restrictions on that power. You can't just say, well, it gives them the power to do X. And then you just say, well, it's meant to do this. It's meant to do this. No, I want to see that in the law, please. I really do. Because as written, people could come after Northern Perspective. People could come out, or the government could come after Northern Perspective. The government could go after Juno News. The government could go after anybody that they wanted. So you need to specifically say a specified entity, not a person, and you need to specify the scenarios on which you would be able to do that. That way, the government would have to prove that an entity is causing a deliberate denial of service attack to, say, the 911 infrastructure or things like that. Now we're talking. Now it makes a lot more sense. And Canadians can kind of get behind that. So you need to look at doing this, because that is the whole concern with the specific part of the law, that you're attacking or targeting an individual person, and then the government can do that whenever they want.
Why the secrecy? Why are there the secrecy provisions provided in this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So generally speaking, the secrecy provisions are both not necessary and not operationalizable. So when we're dealing with equipment that applies to all telecom carriers, 99.9% of the time, we're going to be going out with a public consultation with rules, and we want everyone to know the rules of the road. There can be some specific circumstances where, for instance, an operator has a vulnerability in their network that's very specific, where disclosing that vulnerability would essentially invite hackers to flood the zone while that operator is trying to get that under control. So that's the use case for the confidential order-making provision. It does include oversight, for instance, notification requirements to NSIRA and NSICOP so that they have line of sight and ensure that the power is being used appropriately. It's also subject to the annual reports to Parliament. So even though...
Yeah, sorry, that doesn't fly. So why the need for secrecy? Well, in 99% of the cases, it won't be secret. Yeah, but it says in the law. You're essentially saying, trust us. Even though it says in the law that basically this will all remain secret, we're not going to make it secret. Just trust us. Yeah, I don't think so. And I wouldn't care if this was a conservative government or a liberal government. The point is any government, because the law cannot be framed only in the context of the party that is putting it into place. Now, in this case, it's the Liberals, so I definitely don't trust them. But even if it was the Conservatives, I would have the exact same criticism, because it's not going to just be that particular Conservative government. I may trust that Conservative government, but there may be governments that come after them that I don't trust. And this is where we have to say the test for a law must be assuming you have a government with ill intent, and how would they use that? So for him to say, well, there may be vulnerabilities, well, that's fine. You can, this still doesn't wash from an IT perspective. You can have the government say, well, we've directed Rogers to shut down this portion of their network for specific reasons. So if they're shutting down the network or they're limiting it, which IT people can do, what's the concern? There wouldn't be any need to make it secret. And then he goes on to say, well, and this is going to be, reviewed by INSERA and NSICOP and to make sure that the law is being used appropriately. Oh, you mean those committees where we're not allowed to see any of the information, right? You mean those committees where it's all secret and we would never know if they say that the law is not being used correctly. Sorry, this all relies on trust. It has to be enshrined in the law exactly what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, especially when you are granting yourself more power. You're granting yourself more power. All of the limits have to be outlined in the law.
Review, like if somebody feels that these decisions are infringing on their charter rights?
Certainly anyone can go to the courts with an application of judicial review. And
but what if it's secret? Like if they've been ordered that they can't say anything, how would they go to the courts?
We still need to consult the affected parties. Like that's a bedrock. That's a provision of the bill, and it's also a bedrock provision of administrative law. So, like though the entity affected still needs to have the opportunity to make their case about how the order may affect them. And they can go to the court, as well as, again, the notification to review bodies and the annual report to Parliament, which even if it doesn't disclose the individual, like the detailed nature of the order, still needs to describe the activities as well as their necessity.
Is there a time limit on those things? Like it says specified time. I only have 10 seconds left.
Yes.
So.
We have 90 days to notify NSERA and NSICOP, and the report to Parliament is tabled annually.
Sorry, my friend, but you didn't answer the question. How can you go to the court if you must keep it secret? You're breaking the law, assuming that this is passed in its current form. So how can you issue a court challenge by also breaking the law? And you didn't answer the question. Plus, you're doing it after the fact. What's the point? So you'd basically be relying on Bell and Rogers and Cogeco and the big telecom companies and big internet companies to have some backbone and say no. Well, we saw that backbone when the Emergencies Act was implemented, didn't we? It was a piece of cooked spaghetti because all the organizations that the government tapped and said, you need to do this and this and this and this, and the banks and all of this stuff, when the funds were seized, the banks just complied. There was no pushback. So no, Canadians don't have a lot of trust in this.
MP Gill for 5 minutes, please.
This is for being here today. My line of questioning is going to be on the freedom of speech and expression. The Canadian Constitution Foundation has raised concern about the civil liberties implications of Bill C-8, subclause 15.2. Would give the minister the ability to make decisions to kick someone off the internet. So my question would be, what safeguards are in place to prevent the government from using cybersecurity as a pretext for silencing speech?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Certainly appreciate the importance of the subject raised. There are protections at the outset, during the use of the authority, and after the fact. So, for instance, the policy objective specifies the protection of the Canadian telecommunications system as the overarching scope of action. So individual speech has no bearing on the ability of Bell Canada or Rogers to maintain its network or the reliability of its services. That just has no relation there. There's further precision that the use of the authority needs to be reasonable to the gravity of the nature of the threat that you're trying to combat. And there are criteria established by the Supreme Court in over many decades, but including in the 2019 Vavilov decision that specifies what reasonableness will be. There's other oversight and reporting requirements, including to NSERA and SECOP, and then finally to Parliament.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, it seems that if this legislation is passed within its current form, unamended, we are going to be giving the Minister of Industry the sweeping power with virtually no checks or balances. In theory, the minister could wake up one morning, as one of my other colleagues referred, and not be impressed by a post on social media, going further to basically that it says it poses a threat to our telecommunications services. Without a warrant, without a trial, without any automatic judicial review, the minister could compel Rogers or TELUS to go and seek these people's private data. So what do you have to say about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Would note the scoping mechanisms that limit any action with respect to the disconnection of services. Furthermore, to the question about personal data. So first, the scoping applies to those considerations as well. So again, like the personal data or browsing history of individual Canadians are not germane to the underlying maintenance or reliability of the telecommunications infrastructure in question. There is a further amendment that was adopted when the bill was C-26 that for greater certainty explicitly prohibits the use. This was already prohibited, but it adds just an extra level of clarity that the order-making powers cannot be used to intercept private communications.
So what measures could be put in place to ensure that this isn't misused or worse, turned into a political tool for the Liberal government against people or organizations that they disagree with?
Well, and this begs the question. We've already done a video on this. We've looked at C-8. There are concerning parts about it. And this all sounds like, just trust us. You have the opinion that, well, someone's, private browsing or private activity on the internet is not germane to the maintenance of the telecommunications network. Well, what if the minister decides it is? This is the question. Because as written, it would allow them to do that. You can say, well, that's not relevant. But what if the minister decides it is? And this is the whole problem with this process. And again, every bill is a process. So the process here is the minister gets to make the decision. You know what? I need to make this decision. And then he goes and says to the telecom companies, you have to go and do this. And by the way, it's secret. So the telecom communication has to go and do it. Somebody's internet service is cut off. They're like, well, what's going on? And telecommunications company isn't allowed to tell them. That would be an interesting explanation from, company to customer. And then let's say NCR reviews it and says, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Great. Who gets to know that? NCR. That's it. Nobody else gets to know. Because it's all done after the fact. So the person whose internet service was cut off, they don't even know that it was the government, potentially. So they don't even know how to actually, move on from that. Do they do a court challenge? How do you do a court challenge for something you don't know where it came from? This is why there has to be safeguards for these decisions. And it needs to be written and spelled out clearly in the bill. The US does not have the ability to cut somebody off from the internet because it's not necessary. If you're concerned about potential cyber threats, you are more concerned about the network as a whole and being able to shut down and limit traffic going from one part of the network to another. That's why it's more broad. So yes, safeguards are needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Maybe I would, ultimately what the committee decides is the committee's prerogative, so I can't speak on behalf of the committee. I would note that the set of authorities that were introduced with the bill and that were adopted in the previous committee study that, again, add for protection both in the outset of the scoping. So the concerns that are raised are already prohibited within the scoping of the law currently. There are consultation requirements that allow for additional kind of oversight and consideration of the use of those powers. And then there are notification requirements and reporting requirements, including for the narrow confidential use of authorities that ensure oversight.
I have a final question. Multiple civil society groups have raised concern about federal governments trying to grant themselves the power of intrusion on our private lives and under the name of security. Have these organizations been genuinely consulted before the development of this bill?
You have about 15 seconds.
So the short answer is that yes, we received multiple submissions from civil liberties organizations, and I can say for sure that my team looked at them, studied them very carefully, and considered them very carefully, and including submissions that were made to the committee in the previous Parliament. We studied those very carefully.
Okay. What I get from that is, yes, we received submissions. We looked at them. We didn't necessarily take their feedback and put it into the writing of this. That's what I get from that.
How is it determined if the minister's decision under this powers is reasonable? Who determines if that's a reasonable thing that the minister has done?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So at the outset, first there is consultation on the rules, and we are required to take into consideration what those views are. And then there are notification and transparency requirements after the fact, and then ultimately all decisions of the minister are reviewable by the courts. And the telecom operators are not shy to go to the court. They are, well-resourced and frequently make use of that avenue.
I don't know if we need to give the government the ability to secretly ask for individual Canadians' data. I don't think that's necessary. Law enforcement can get that with a warrant. Government doesn't need that. The only thing the government should be able to do is to manage a crisis. Individual people causing individual problems with telecom networks, the governments don't need to get involved in. Why? Because the telecom networks are going to have that concern, and they're going to be dealing with it toot sweet. That's literally what their cybersecurity departments and the rest of their operational IT infrastructure and their team supporting it, that's what they do. That's what they do. Like, I've worked for them, so I get it. The only thing that the government should be concerned about doing is managing large crises. So if they determine that we're being hit by a massive cyber attack, then they should be able to say, Bell, shut down the Northern Ontario network. Shaw or Rogers, shut down the, western corridor of the Western Canada network and route everything down through the southern corridor. Like, that's what they should be able to do. Nothing else. You don't need anything else. And for them to say, well, it's security. Yeah, this is always what we hear with extreme socialism. Surrender your rights so we can make you secure. Sorry. Do I think that it's a good idea to give the government some sort of power to shut down specific parts of the infrastructure? Sure. But it should be large areas. And it shouldn't be secret. And you must allow, secret or not, you must allow the telecom providers to be able to challenge it in court if appropriate. So I want to see some amendments, so we'll be following this very closely, and hopefully we can trim this bill down so it's going to be more reasonable and less impact on your charter rights.